Hey there and welcome. In this video, I'm going to be talking about asynchronous programming in JavaScript. This is going to be a pretty high-level overview that talks about the concepts and why they're important, but if you're interested in doing a deeper dive, I would definitely recommend checking out the MDN docs as well. So let's jump right in. So what is asynchronous programming? Asynchronous programming essentially enables your program to multitask. So this is especially useful for potentially long-running tasks like HTTP requests. So for example, if you were to perform an HTTP request in synchronous programming, your program would actually be unresponsive until that task finished. Whereas in asynchronous programming, your program continues to be responsive while that request runs in the background. And this obviously creates a much better experience for the user. So how is async programming implemented? So traditionally we used callbacks. Then JavaScript introduced the concept of promises. And finally, they introduced async await, which is built on top of promises, but I think makes it even easier to work with asynchronous code. So let's talk about each of these. So first we have callbacks. And just to start with a quick definition, a callback is just a function passed to another function as an argument. So in the context of asynchronous programming, a callback is usually passed to an asynchronous function, and there's an asynchronous operation that completes, and then the callback is invoked. And so when you have multiple asynchronous operations that you want to do in sequence, you can end up with this thing that's called callback hell or pyramid of doom, where you have a bunch of these nested callbacks, and it becomes, kind of difficult to read and follow what's going on. So I'm not going to talk about this code in much detail because this is the older way of doing it, and I don't think asynchronous programming is really done with callbacks anymore. But this is just an example here for you to take a look at, which is just sort of mocking a bunch of asynchronous operations and then showing what it looks like when you try to run them in sequence and pass them into one another. All right, now let's talk about promises. So a promise is just an object that's returned by an asynchronous function, and it represents the current state of that asynchronous operation. So when the promise is initially returned to the caller, usually that asynchronous operation isn't finished yet. But the promise provides methods that allow you to handle the eventual success or failure of the operation. A method called then and a method called catch. So if the operation succeeds, the callback you pass to .then is invoked. And if the operation fails, the callback passed to .catch is invoked. So you can see two examples here, and this fetch data function is essentially mocking an HTTP request, right? It's mocking the response. And in the first example, we are basically calling within set timeout, we're just calling the resolve function. So typically, you would have some logic in here, like let's say you were trying to extract data from a database, for example. If something went wrong, then you would call reject. Otherwise, you would resolve with the data that you pulled from the database. But here we don't have a database set up. We're writing the data right in line here. So in this case, when we call fetch data and we attach a .then and a .catch, when the promise resolves with data, whatever callback we pass to .then is going to be invoked. So we're going to see in the log this name and this age. Down here in this example, we are doing the reject. So we're calling reject instead of resolve, and we're passing into it error fetching data. So when we call fetch data and we attach .then and .catch, in this example, the callback that you pass into .catch is what's going to be invoked. So the error is actually going to be logged. All right, now let's talk about async await. So async await is the newer and simpler way to work with asynchronous promise-based code. So you can use the async keyword to declare an asynchronous function, and we can use the await keyword to pause execution until this operation completes. So this is especially useful if we have multiple requests that we want to chain back to back, where subsequent requests depend on the results from a previous request. So you can see that in this example, we want to have the value of result 1 before we call this HTTP request. So this await keyword pauses execution until this operation finishes and we have a value for result 1. And then we can pass that value into the URL string for the second HTTP request. And so some of the benefits of async await you're seeing already are that it looks a lot more like synchronous code. And so this really enhances readability. And it also simplifies error handling by allowing you to use try catch, where error handling code is in the same block as the code that caused the error. So as we are executing this try block, if at any point we run into an error, control will jump to the catch block and execute the code here. So I hope you found this quick overview of asynchronous programming in JavaScript helpful. If you liked this video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.